Hey everybody, welcome back to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts, Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that wherever you listen to us, that you would subscribe, leave a comment and a review. Helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're talking about break the cycle, on how self-doubt holds us back and how to beat it. So if you ever felt like an imposter despite your success, you're not alone. We're going to dive deep into how self-doubt forms, how it quietly shapes our behaviors, and what it takes to break the cycle. And with that, I want to bring on our co-host, Joseph. Joseph, say what's up, bro, and take it away.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? So today, I kind of wanted to go deeper into a topic that we've talked about, once or twice so far, but dive a little bit deeper into it, right? Because you can really always go deeper into questions and topics that we cover. So I kind of want to go into the root of self-doubt, where it starts. And I want to take it all the way back to just childhood criticism and deep-seated inferiority.
Yeah, no, definitely a good topic. Definitely, I think a place where a lot of us do struggle, and it does stem back from the childhood criticism and the things that were planted in us. So kind of like saying, the early negativity feedback, that's given to us, it often plants the belief system, in us that I'm not good enough.
Yeah, exactly. An example that I like to give is if you were around people, or maybe your parents even, or again, kids at the school, if they're like, "Oh, you're dumb," or if a teacher said like, "Hey, like don't do that," because, or like, "Hey, move, let's move it on to someone who's smarter than you," essentially, those will leave impressions on your subconscious.
Right. Yeah, those are seeds that are planted and they grow into trees, as we come into adulthood, so those type of feelings, those type of things, we're talking about, that come in and they cause, that belief in us, and sometimes, even as we continue to grow in our success, sometimes those seeds that have been planted can, make us feel like, imposters, so imposter syndrome, and it's really comes down to, just being a limiting identity, that was planted years ago.
Exactly, yeah. And I kind of want to emphasize the point that even successful people can feel like imposters. I talk a lot about MMA fighters because those are kind of like I guess the quote unquote celebrities that I typically follow, because that's like the sport that I follow. Pretty much the only sport that I follow, really. But and I've made reference to this fighter before, but Israel Adesanya, he talked about how he struggled with imposter syndrome after he won the belt, or like after he became champion. People would be like, "Oh, you're the champ, you're the best in the world," and he would be like, "Am I really?" Or like he hit a little depression because he didn't feel like he was the best. Or if you want a bigger example, a bigger name, Tyson Fury, the heavyweight champion, right, the Gypsy King,
Hmm.
he went into a downward spiral after he became champion. After he beat Klitschko in 2013, he basically wanted to not exist anymore. He went in a deep, dark depression. And so even successful people have a sense of, inferiority, or a sense of self-doubt.
Right, and that brings us to our next point. It stems back again. Those seeds that were planted, they can plant, fear, right? Fear of failure, fear of rejection, or because of criticism. So, sometimes it takes a long time before you actually discover what caused it. So when you look back, you can only make progress when you look back and connect the dots. You can see, okay, this is why this happened, this is why that happened. So a lot of times, sometimes we get into those spirals, and we get out of control for a little bit. But we're gonna show you today, some tools and tips to overcome this. So as we continue on, with this podcast, we'll break some of that stuff down.
Exactly. Yeah. And so with that, fear isn't just a fear of failure. It's also the fear of being seen failing. People, especially people with imposter syndrome, I could speak for myself in saying this, but like a lot of the time, I'm like, I don't want people to know that I can't do things, right? So then that will put a lot of pressure on myself, unnecessary pressure on myself.
Right. And I think, what happens with the imposter syndrome when it sets in, it's not so much, the syndrome itself, or we can't do it. We're just, the negativity that's been planted, those criticisms, or, you're not good enough. That's kind of what you begin to go on, though, so it's pushing through it in spite of, how you feel at the moment, so like high performers, that's what they do. They push through, and they make things happen, right? So it's sometimes you do have to just push through that fear, to overcome this, and we'll get more into that as we break this.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of just following suit with like the fear of being seen or whatever, that fear will create avoidance paralysis or even self sabotage in the form of, right? So even high performers, they always talk about overworking, right? They'll overwork themselves because they don't want to fail or whatever, right? I'm sure there's been plenty of boxers. I mean, Floyd Mayweather, he talked about work is easy because he worked so hard and he overworked his competition. That way he never failed. That way he became 50-0.
Right. And that's the thing, and putting in the reps, doing all the things, that we've talked on previous podcasts will help you to overcome this. But when we're in it, sometimes what happens is it leads us, to avoiding, the situation, or over analyzing and getting us into paralysis, so it's kind of like a quiet sabotage that we do because of the seeds that were planted, and that of the self-doubt.
Yeah, and it all goes back to self-limiting beliefs, right? Those are internal breaks. These are beliefs that in your head you say like you can't, you shouldn't, you'll regret it, right? So let's say you want to start a business, or you are starting a business, and in the back of your head you're like, I shouldn't do that because X, Y, and Z, or I can't do that.
Right. Or you're in the business and you're stuck because, again, you can only go as far as your growth process, so sometimes we self-sabotage too, where we're like, maybe it's just, we start something, we're like, it just wasn't meant to be, or that didn't work out because, and we always make excuses for it. So that's a self-limiting belief, that takes place in us, so, but challenging them, daily is the essential breakthrough, for the mental ceilings that we place, or that have been placed on us. And we've just been, keeping that because it's planted in our subconscious minds.
Exactly that. Again, just trying to call yourself out whenever you have, I forgot what level. I think it was level 2 of negative or of self-talk, right? If you have the I can't or whatever, if you say I can't, call yourself out on it, right? Be like, ooh, I just said I can't. And then try to shift that. And that's pretty much how self-doubt manifests, right? It's overthinking or even perfectionism, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, ooh, I need to do it perfectly. I need my version 1 to be the perfect product that will never need to be changed.
Yeah, there's a saying, right? Perfection is like fear in disguise, so and the thing is like sometimes we just overthink things, or we feel it has to be, perfect in order for it to work. But here's the reality: like every company, every device, take the iPhone for example, they didn't start out with the top of the line one. They came out with version 1, or just iPhone. then 1.1, 2, 3. Now I don't even know where we're at, 17, 18. So it's the thing is that it's not the perfectionism, is that you could just continue to enhance as you go along is the point.
Exactly, yeah. And again, the big one is procrastination, right? Because it's like, okay, well, I need to like that you put off, let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to launch a product in 2 weeks or whatever, or a month from now. But then you keep pushing that date back further and further because it's like, oh, this is not perfect. This is not perfect. I need to still work on this. And so, in a way, that's procrastination. Or even you could be like, oh, well, I'm not ready for this or whatever. So, I don't want to say that you should rush inherently. Excellence is healthy, but perfectionism is paralyzing.
Procrastination, it happens, and we we're all guilty of doing this from time to time. Like you said,
Mhm.
if you're starting a business, you're like, oh, I got to build the website, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do that, and then I got to do this. And what happens, you don't actually execute because you're too worried. It doesn't look perfect. It's not right. This is not right, so the perfectionism, is very paralyzing. So if you find yourself in that, sometimes it's best just to put something out there. And like I said, you can always modify it after the fact, and that helps you to get over that perfectionism.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And again, I want to just emphasize how really, if you dive even deeper into it, if you ask yourself why, right? Why am I overthinking? Why am I trying to be perfect? Oftentimes, it goes back to ego, shame, right? These things will really hold you back, especially the ego. The ego is a big one that you need to not only overcome, but also at some point try to dissolve it.
Right. And that's the thing, it's because we're creating a persona, or the outward of the appearance of the way we want things to be, and when it's not, that's your ego. But internally, when you're confident in what you're doing and everything, because you're doing it for the right reasons and everything, you don't have to experience that shame. So the point is that sometimes when you're going through these things, you have to trace it back and ask yourself why, right? And that's where we find out sometimes these self-doubts, these limiting beliefs that have been instilled in us have to take change.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, external success will sometimes outspace or even it will off-put self-worth triggers of self-sabotage, right? So like let's say that you have external success, right? Maybe your product that you launched did have some traction, right? Well, you still might have those inner triggers of self-sabotage, but you're like, oh well, I had a good product, so I'm just going to move on instead of addressing the problem, instead of trying to really unfold and unpack those self sabotage triggers.
And we see that, constantly with celebrities, the external success. So externally, everything is great, right? Everything's in place. The boats, the houses, cars, money, all that stuff. But internally, their self worth, triggers self sabotage. A lot of them that have, not with us anymore because of, they were trying to cover up the pains, right? So whether it was, alcoholism, drugs, or whatever the case may be, those are the ways that they covered it, and it was just, again, a subconscious thing that wasn't really dealt with, and I want to talk about the, people unconsciously bring themselves back down to familiar levels. So this is your internal thermostat. So sometimes what happens is, when you're doing really, really good, your thermostat is really hot, right? So you're just like jamming, boom, 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 boom. And then you get to a place of success or whatever that may be. But because you've never been there before and there's self-limiting beliefs, we go and we turn the thermostat down and cool things down, and that's not a good place to be. You want to be, pushing and continue to sustain, and doing these things. So check the ego, definitely, and check that thermostat. If you're not progressing, you're not growing, maybe you just kind of like lowered the thermostat down and cooled yourself down.
Exactly, yeah. And I kind of just want to be or say something silly, but the first thing you mentioned was a boat. That's how I know that you're closer to the sea than I am. I didn't even think about a boat.
That's funny.
Yeah. But so again, and this kind of continues if you keep asking yourself why, right? That's something that my life coach really instilled in me. Whenever I would say that I have a block or whatever, he would just keep asking why, right? I guess that's I forgot. I think it's called Socratic questioning or whatever. But you just keep asking yourself why. You keep going down that road of why. I don't like this. Why? Because blah 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 blah. Why? You know.
Hmm.
And if you keep going down that chain, a lot of the time, or even some of the time, I won't use such a sweeping term, but sometimes it will be a reluctance to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's because, again, it can be upbringing. I mean, in my childhood, it was like, you know, I would say, you couldn't cry. We don't cry type thing. As silly as that sounds, but it's like just tough it out. Tough it up. Be a man, move on. So it makes you reluctant, to be vulnerable with people sometimes. You know what I mean? So it took me a long time to realize that, like, in order for me to get to that next level, I had to reach out. I had to be vulnerable and be like, hey, I just don't get it. So even in jobs, in work, in business, I would go to places, a lot of these guys, had MBAs. I barely made it through high school. So, but I'm hanging with these guys, and we're doing business, and they're talking these big words, right? And I'm like, hey, bro, dumb it down a little for me, layman's terms. But the thing is like I learned to be vulnerable in that, rather than pretending like I knew it all. It's just better to be vulnerable and to ask, and sometimes that's what happens with the perfectionism and the overthinking because of the limiting beliefs and the seeds that are planted in us. We think we have to do things a certain way. Externally, we should look this way, but internally, we're a mess. So, don't be ashamed or anything to be vulnerable and to ask for help.
Exactly. And I forgot who said this, but I was taking notes on one guy. I want to say it was Jim Rohn. I don't quite remember, but they were saying you only have to be stupid once, right? You only have to be vulnerable once. Or, if you don't know something, you ask, and then boom, that's the one instance where you said, hey, I don't know, right? And the smart person will ask the dumb questions. That way they're not dumb further, or like that way they don't continue to be dumb. I really forgot who said that, but that really stuck with me. But even then, how many times do you ask a doctor something and they kind of just like give you a whole lot of fluff because they don't really know the answer, but they try to give you all of the information that they think is relevant instead of just answering the question of, hey doc, what's wrong with me? And so people will fake certainty, or even I've done it myself, where if someone asked me something and I didn't know the question or the answer to the question, I kind of gave them a whole runaround because I couldn't give them a direct answer. And instead of just being like, oh, I don't know, I gave them a whole runaround just to make it sound like I knew what I was talking about when I really didn't. And so nowadays, I just say the simple thing of, I don't know, I'm going to look into that. Or I'm not too sure. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, and that's a good answer. I'm gonna say something funny about the doctor comment you just said. That's why it's called the medical practice, because they're just practicing, bro. No, I'm kidding, you guys. I'm kidding. If you're a doctor, I'm jokes. But it's true. Many times professionals feel the shame in not knowing. So instead of admitting their vulnerabilities, they just fake the certainty. And that's something that I would walk away and feel like I would feel even more shame in the fact, like, pretending that I didn't know. And this is, pre-internet, so it's not like we can just go and ask ChatGPT real quick, hey, what did this mean, so I had to do a lot of due diligence to figure things out. So and like I said, for me, growing up, vulnerability was seen as weakness, not courage. It was frowned upon to be like that, and this is growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s type thing. So it was like, you had to do these things. But in all honesty, just being honest, and will help you, to get to that next level and to start to break the cycle of the things that you're going through, and it really does help, with overcoming the overthinking and perfectionism. It's like, just get it out there, so just be honest, communication, that's the key to the solution.
Exactly. Yeah. And some people can really detect whenever you're BSing an answer. So just be honest and be like, hey, I don't know. That way, that would make me feel a lot more. I would have a lot more trust in a medical professional. They're like, I don't know what that is. And so again, I kind of want to pivot to just rewiring self-doubt. That way you can regain your confidence and flow, or your flow, right? And so the biggest thing is turning down the inner critic.
Yeah, that's the bad boy that, gets us in trouble. It's the inner critic's the same one, that's the inner inspirer, where we could do this, we can do that, we can do this, but then, and we're like, rah, rah, rah. And then, a couple days later, we see all the challenges, and that's because we start to listen to the inner critic, I can't do this, I can't do that because of this, because of that, or sometimes that inner voice will even say, I'm not enough, or like, who am I, so, this is what we're going to start breaking down right now, is the rewiring that self-doubt, and reclaim confidence.
Exactly. And so a big way to help combat this is identify the internal voice that says you're not good enough, right? Like, ask yourself, where is it coming from? And there are different methods. There's different ways. We can, my life coach gave me a technique where it's like, you feel the problem, you kind of get into a meditative state, and then you just kind of try to feel where that actually in your body comes from. Maybe that doesn't work for people. That didn't really work for me, to be honest. But again, if you keep asking yourself why, and where did this come from? Why do I believe this, and where did it come from? Eventually, you'll weed it down to maybe someone that you were playing kickball with as a kid said, hey, you can't do that. You're not strong enough, or whatever the case may be. And then boom, you kind of start to unravel that. And then you start to replace judgment with curiosity, right? So whenever you say like, oh, where did this come from? You can also ask yourself, what can I learn from this?
And another thing to add to that is something that I did, when I started my business, I was an employee, have my wife, kids, a home. I just bought a home, and, everything was, I would say on the outside was good. I was working as an employee, getting paid pretty well, but I was like, I want to have more control, more freedom, more opportunity, right? Like I wanted to jump into the unknown. Again, I didn't have anybody that I can go and talk to, so a lot of it was just trial and error. But the question that I asked myself is, what's the worst that can happen? And I had to face the reality of what the worst can happen, right? I could lose my home, I could lose my marriage, my family separated, all these things. And so those were limiting beliefs that would hold a person back, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy to just jump out into something, without knowing that you have any money to do this or whatever. But on the other side, the positive is, this business takes off. It funds us a good lifestyle. Everything changes, the freedom, all these things. So I wrestled with that for a while. And then I just finally said, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? Let me just keep going, right? So I did it. And, 20 years later, we're here, and everything worked out. so my limiting belief that was put in me again, that you can't do this, you can't do that, I made it through, but it was all because of the self-talk, that I reading books, it helped me to build that resilience, instead of like fear and shame and any of that stuff. So my encouragement is, I hope that message resonates with you and encourages you, inspires you that, you can do it.
Yeah, no, that's a very powerful story because I know myself included, I could benefit from that story because it just speaks to your not only your resilience but also your self-talk. And those are two things that you really need to practice everyone should practice, right? Practice your self-talk. That way you build resilience instead of shame. And again, another thing that can really help is escaping the comparison trap, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're comparing yourself like, oh, I should be here, Jimmy down the street, he has a Corvette, whatever the case may be, right? Everyone is on their own timeline. You don't need to be ahead or, I wanted to be ahead of everyone at this time. That's something that I tell myself sometimes, right? Even the other day, I was like, I thought about just kids I went to high school with. I was like, you know what? I wonder if they're ahead of me in life. And then after I said that, I was like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And so instead of having envy, replace it with inspiration, right? And this is a big motto that I tell myself. If they can do it, I can too. Or if everyone else can do it, why can't I? The why can't I is so much more powerful for me, at least.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, just don't get in that comparison trap. There's we're all in different levels, so some are ahead, some are behind, so our thing is we're always aspiring to be better, to be the best version that we can be, and the rewiring of your self-doubt will help you to get to that next level. That thermostat, I truly believe in that method, that like, don't turn the thermostat down, just keep going, keep pushing through, and definitely, cause that comparison trap can really keep you, stunt, from, growing to the next level. So anyways, I just want to recap real quick, guys. Thank you so much. This is really a great podcast for this one. So talking about breaking the cycle and how self-doubt holds us back, so if you feel like an imposter, despite your success, you're not alone. We all go through it, but we got to grow from it and learn from it, so we talked about where it stems from. Sometimes it's childhood criticisms from the people that are around us. It builds these self-doubt fears, so sometimes that fear can look like failure, rejection, or criticism, self-limiting beliefs, so again, and the way we overcame them, is not allowing perfection or overthinking to control us, ego, shame, let that go. Keep your internal thermostat high on the heat, keep it going so you can keep growing, and don't be reluctant to be vulnerable. Again, ask for help, join communities, join groups, get yourself into a place where you're with like-minded people, because it's going to help you to get to that next level, and with that, guys, again, don't get into that comparison trap. So that's what I got. I want to ask Joseph if he has any final closing thoughts before we close it out.
Yeah, I just want to nail home just really emphasize, keep asking yourself why and where does it come from? And then after you do that, say, what can I learn from this, right? Because if you're constantly trying to dig up the roots, if you're trying to dig up the weeds in your mind, you'll always have a clean field of grass, right? And so I also want to give a shout out to our community of entrepreneurs that are tired of doing everything alone. If they have imposter syndrome, we have a community that combines practical self-growth tools and community support, as well as weekly structure to help you stay focused and follow through with whatever you're trying to get done. So that's at backtobrilliance.com. If you scroll down to our community section, you'll be linked up with entrepreneurs just like you.
Well said. Well, thank you everybody for listening and tuning into our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment and a review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're out. Until the next one, stay blessed.
Bye-bye.